Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched. This is Bill Peschel, and this week it's Red and White Roses, Inheritance Murder, Secret Origins, and Fraught Futures. We'll be talking about Sad Cypress, the 2003 adaptation starring David Suchet as Hercule Poirot. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage and crime of the fictional sort, Teresa Peschel. Hello, Teresa.
Hi, Bill. It's so wonderful to be here again with you in the office under the stairs.
We're going to be talking about Sad Cypress, and we saw it last night, and this is coming on the heels of the previous one.
Five Little Pigs, which was really stellar, and this was also a wonderful, wonderful adaptation. They did a beautiful job following the novel. I was just very impressed.
So let's go into the plot a little bit, because we open up with our couple in peril, soon to be in peril, Eleanor Carlisle and Roddy Winter.
Well, the way it actually opens, if I remember the movie correctly, and certainly the way it does in the book, is it starts with something that Agatha never did, but she did for Sad Cypress, and that is the damsel in the dock. There's Eleanor sitting in the dock in the courtroom, probably at Old Bailey, because she was a fairly important person. She wasn't some peasant. And she's being accused of murder, both of Mary Gerard and her aunt Laura, who was extremely wealthy and paid a lot of attention to Mary, suspiciously so. But then, young women can be so engaging with old ladies, especially when the relatives are not there to keep an eye on things.
And this is the first time in the Poirot series that Agatha Christie put someone in the dock that it's a major part of the case.
I think so. And when I think back on all of the novels and the various film adaptations, the only other one that comes to mind where you really have a lot of courtroom scenes is Witness for the Prosecution. But she didn't tend to do that a lot with Poirot. And in fact, I can't think right offhand of any of the Poirots where you spend a substantial amount of time in court. But in Sad Cypress, you do, because Eleanor is actually arrested, and the case looks very, very black against her.
Yeah, in fact, it would have been earlier, because in The Mysterious Ferret Styles, Agatha wrote the conclusion with Poirot in the witness box telling the solution to the case, and the publisher looked at this and said, you haven't been in court very often, have you? Why don't you try rewriting it? And of course, we get what we call the Poirot of gathering all the suspects together and revealing the solution.
Yes, and this has become the favorite of mystery writers everywhere, and I suspect that there is probably not a real detective on the face of the earth who hasn't wished he could do that, to stand in front of all of the suspects and parade around and parade his information and say, you did it, and this is why.
In fact, that showed up in the Fables graphic novel series, right?
Yes, it did. Bigby Wolf, he actually specifically commented on that to Snow White, because she was saying, why are we doing this? And he says, because I really want to. Because every detective wants to do this. In
Sad Cypress, like I say, we open up with Eleanor and Roddy. They are childhood friends.
They have been friends for years. They are related, but with the kind of their relationship is one that we do not have a word for it in the English language. English is sadly deficient in words for relationships. Basically, everybody that you're sort of related to who's in your age bracket is a cousin. And everybody who is old enough to be your parents that you're sort of related to is an aunt or an uncle. But the way the relationship actually is, and I know there are languages with a word for this exact relationship, Eleanor is Laura Wellman's niece. Her father was Laura Wellman's brother. Roddy is Eleanor's nephew on her husband's side. That is, her husband Henry had a sibling who had a child. So the two of them are not genetically related in any way, shape, or form. And
was that Eleanor or Laura? How is he related again?
Laura's husband Henry is he had a sibling who had a son named Roddy. So Roddy is Laura's husband's nephew. He is a nephew by marriage to Laura, but Eleanor is a niece through the family line to Laura. So Laura is genetically related to Eleanor, but not to Roddy. So Eleanor and Roddy have no genes in common other than, way, way, way back.
Right. And Laura Wellman owns the big house. She's the wealthy woman. She's ill now. She suffered a stroke or two. And she has always wanted to see Eleanor and Roddy get married and inherit the house.
Yes, she's always been fond of them. The movie doesn't go into as much detail as the text does. But again, movies have to show. They can't tell the way a novel does. Although you do get a really important little scene in the beginning. The actress playing Laura Wellman, by the way, did a very nice job of simulating a stroke victim. Laura Wellman tells Eleanor that she hopes that she does love Roddy, but not too much. Because if you love a man too much, he can take it, especially if he doesn't return the favor. It will just ruin your life. It will never be reciprocated. He'll walk all over you. And the reverse is true as well. And in fact, it comes out really a lot more in the novel. Eleanor is absolutely adores Roddy, but she understands his fastidiousness, that if she was all over the place, oh, Roddy, 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 he would be repelled. And in fact, he even says this to her, how much he appreciates that he doesn't actually know for sure how she feels about him. It makes him feel that he has to work harder. And if she expressed how she really felt, he would be bored and he would walk away. And she adores him.
And this kind of struggle with Eleanor to try to understand Roddy better forms a major part. It's a major motivation, because when things happen with Mary, she blames Mary.
Yeah, she blames Mary, but it wasn't Mary at all. Again, the novel does this beautiful job. Roddy and Eleanor are at the Hunterbury estate, and he's out there in the sunshine and feeling vaguely discontented. The birds are singing and the sun is shining and the flowers are blooming. And I guess he can feel the sap rising. But he is discontented. And then Mary walks onto the scene and he's lost. Yeah, completely lost.
She was out of the country for a while, wasn't she?
She had spent several years in Germany as an au pair. And she comes back, and in fact, she now speaks German fairly well, and she's not sure what she's going to do. She doesn't know what she's going to do next. And they haven't seen her as a young adult. I think the last time they would have seen her, they would probably all have been, because he didn't come down to Hunterbury nearly as often as Eleanor did. So he hasn't seen her in several years.
Right. And she's the gardener's daughter, the adopted daughter of the gardener, right?
Yes, she is the adopted daughter of the gardener, and they played with her as children. The three of them would play together because there wasn't anyone else. And he saw her, and you, and only you, a passion that he has not felt for Eleanor. And Eleanor realizes this almost immediately because of the way he behaves. That cool, diffident fastidiousness. He's practically panting on the pages.
And we also have to mention that the reason why they're there at the house is because Eleanor received a poison pen letter, another favorite Christie trope.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's correct. That's one of the very early things in the movie and in the novel is she receives an anonymous letter saying, watch out for that girl because girls like that take advantage of old ladies, and that old lady's going to die and she's going to leave all the money to that girl. That girl is not named, but they figure it out fairly soon that it is, of course, Mary Gerard.
It's a rather clever deduction on Poirot's part because it was somebody pure as
white
snow.
as the driven snow.
White as the driven snow, and that's Mary had a little lamb. Her fleece was white as snow.
Exactly. Now, in the novel, Poirot, of course, does not come onto the scene until considerably later, but then the TV show is named Poirot and not Agatha Christie Mysteries. So he has to show up right away. And they integrated him very, very well right from the beginning. Sometimes it's rather clumsy. You start getting that Jessica Fletcher syndrome. But in this case, he happens to be there for a different trial, and he knows the doctor, Peter Lord, and he is basically waiting around for his time to come into the dock and testify in a completely unrelated case. So he's already on the spot, and Peter Lord recognizes that he needs something to do. The reason why Peter Lord gets involved is Eleanor is not immediately sure who wrote the letter, and she's concerned, but she can't imagine who this would be about because everyone at Hunterbury is a very nice person, including the nursing staff. And she asked Peter Lord because he's there on a nearly daily basis and he would know. And she's not part of the village, so she wouldn't know, but he would. And then that's how he brings in Poirot. It's really very tragic because Eleanor is madly in love with Roddy, and Roddy is fond of her, but then he sees Mary and he is just completely lost, and they have the most wonderful actor that they chose to play Roddy Winter, and isn't that a great name for him? He looks like he's carved out of snow. He looks bloodless. Not the kind of lusty Viking that you think of in terms of Scandinavian. This is the bloodless one.
He has those Teutonic good looks, the narrow features, the blonde hair, but there's no passion behind him.
Yeah, there's no passion behind him. And you have to have the right actor for this, because if you had somebody like, I'm thinking Aidan Turner, and I'm pretty sure I have his name right. He was the one in Sarah Phelps, and Then There Were None in 2015. And he radiates sex appeal. And he's not going to be able to portray passionless, bloodless, I'm fond of you and I'm perfectly happy to marry you because we'll both be rich and we'll get along fine. But there's no you and only you. You are the center of my life.
So the story goes on. There's all these intimations of disaster happening. Poirot looks at the letter and he's
very concerned. He's very concerned. He actually shows somebody, I can't remember, but he actually shows the back of the letter where you can see that someone has pressed down into the paper. Now, something that they didn't say, but is very clear from looking at the letter, is that whoever it is who wrote that letter, they wrote it out several times before they got their wording right, because there are no mistakes, there are no cross-outs, there are no erasures. It's a clean letter, which means that somebody put some time into it, some thought into it.
It also looked like the letters, when they did a close-up of the page, the letters all looked very different, like they were deliberately disguising their handwriting. It certainly
it was almost like block printing. Mm-hmm. Somebody had very carefully printed it. But again, if you want to send an anonymous letter that does not give any indication of who you are, you write it several times out until you know you have the wording right, and then you recopy it and burn all of the evidence, of course. But you recopy it very, very neatly so as to disguise who it is that you are. But he showed how whoever was writing the letter, they pressed into that paper. So when you look at the back of the page, you can see the strokes of the letters. There was a lot of passion, a lot of anger. It was not a light, easy flowing hand. Their emotions were coming out in that poison pen letter.
So that leads to a dead end. So we have to wait and see what happens next. And we find out that there's a container of opium that was...
morphine. There's a container of morphine. Yes, Nurse Hopkins has a container of morphine that goes missing. We have 2 nurses
serving.
Yes, there's Nurse Hopkins, who is tall and spare. And then Nurse O'Brien is shorter. She has dark hair. She's obviously Irish. She's younger and chipper. And she loves a good gossip. She does. They alternate taking care of Laura Wellman. And they both know Dr. Lord quite well. But it is Nurse Hopkins who loses the morphine. But Nurse O'Brien is not too concerned. I'm sure it will turn up because, of course, no one considers that someone in that house would have stolen the morphine.
Right. And Nurse Hopkins eventually concludes, well, I threw out some papers, so I probably threw that out as well.
Yes, something like that. And Eleanor and Roddy have been called to the house. Laura has another stroke. She begs Eleanor to get Mr. Seddons out. Mr. Seddons is the lawyer, because she needs to make sure that Mary is provided for in the will. And Mary is, despite being the gardener's daughter, Laura has always taken a very fond interest in her. She's paid for extras. She paid for French lessons. She paid for piano lessons. She paid for extra schooling. She paid for all kinds of things for the gardener's child.
But the one thing she hasn't done was make a will.
Yes, that's what they discover, that Laura Wellman did not make a will. As Mr. Seddon says, there are people who feel that if they make a will, that means they're going to die. And I actually have met people like this, and it is not true, folks. So let me remind you, make your will now and save your heirs an enormous amount of trouble. Because if you don't make the decision, the state will do it for you.
But it is interesting in that there was a very good reason why Laura didn't make a will, which we won't go into at the moment. But it was one of those things where you can say you could chalk it up to personality or psychology of the individual, as Poirot would say. Or
pride. And in fact, I don't know I cannot remember with the movie if Laura mentions her pride, but in the novel, she actually tells Eleanor that she believes her besetting sin has always been pride. her pride of position, her pride of place in the community, And the problem with Laura making a will is the questions it would raise. If she gave her entire estate to Mary Gerard, particularly after promising Eleanor and Roddy that she was going to basically divide the estate between the two of them as her only two living relatives, everyone would ask questions. If she divided the estate into thirds, Mary, Eleanor, Roddy, again, there would be a slew of questions, and the truth would eventually come out, which is that Mary Gerard is Laura's natural daughter, her illegitimate daughter, fathered by her lover after her husband died years ago. She got knocked up, and he died in the war, so they couldn't marry, and she went up to Scotland with the gardener's wife as a housemaid, and the gardener's wife came back with a baby. And that's why Laura Wellman always took care of Mary Gerard. She knew who Mary was. Mary was her own daughter. And there is a scene where Laura Wellman, in a high Edwardian dress, is holding a baby, and she never had a baby. Who is this baby? Why did she keep this picture? And there's also a lovely picture of a handsome officer in uniform, and you're given to understand that he couldn't marry her. He was married to someone else, and then he was killed in the war. And, that's the tragedy of her life. But she doesn't want to tell everyone because she's a proud woman and she has a social position to maintain. She doesn't want to tell everyone, hey, I had a torrid affair with a married man and got knocked up.
Well, at least not while she was still alive, because she wanted to have the lawyer come in, and the lawyer had to wait a day. He couldn't come in until the next day, which sets us up for another favorite mystery trope, that she is murdered before she could change her will.
That's right. Or in this case, write her will in the first place. Mm-hmm. And because she dies intestate, that means that the state makes the decision as to who gets the money after the death duties. And this is why, again, if you want your money to go to a specific person, make your will, folks, because the state does not care what you wanted. And in this case, the state does not care that Laura wanted to divide the estate equally between Eleanor and Roddy, or that she wanted to give bequests to any of the servants, legacies to anyone, or make provisions for Mary. Eleanor gets everything, because Laura refused to make her will.
So we have pressure on Eleanor now, because also we forgot to mention that the night before Laura Wellman died, Eleanor catches Roddy in the arms of another woman.
That's right. She sees Roddy kissing Mary, and it's very clear. And I'm ambivalent about this. One of the very earliest scenes that we see with Eleanor and Roddy, it is clear that they have spent the night together. And I am ambivalent about that, particularly for the time period. I mean, they were engaged, but at the same time, I feel ambivalent about that. I'm not sure but he is passionate with Mary in a way that he is not with Eleanor. She gives him back the ring, and Eleanor recognizes she can't compete with Mary, because there's something about Mary that, and I see you smiling at me because I know you love that movie, but yes, there's something about Mary that Roddy can't walk away from. He can't say, well, I am already engaged to this wonderful girl whom I love and who I know loves me, and we're going to be married, and I really should say, no thank you, Ms. Gerard. But all I can think of is the pulse-pounding call of flesh. I gotta have this girl, and I gotta have this girl right now, and the girl that is right next to me, the wonderful girl that I know and love, is suddenly yesterday's breakfast.
It's true love, because he's willing to give up a chance at the fortune that would come to Eleanor and to him. I mean, maybe he would get some, but on the other hand, he's going for the poor relation.
But at the time, remember, they still thought that that Laura Wellman had a will and that he was getting half of the estate. He wasn't going to be poor.
No, but
he just wouldn't get everything with Eleanor. He wouldn't get everything with Eleanor. He would only get half of it. But that means instead of getting £200,000, he only gets £100,000. But he would still be comfortably well off for quite some time, and he could have the girl of his dreams.
Right. This time of the story, Eleanor is very upset. She's very unhappy.
She is really distraught because he dumped her. He dumped her for another woman, and then he doesn't man up and say, I saw her and there will never be anybody else for me, and I'm really sorry, and you're just a great girl, Eleanor, and I'm sure you'll find somebody who'll feel about you the same way. And he doesn't really do that, but Eleanor feels more strongly. She's more sensitive. she's probably smarter, and she recognizes these things that Roddy is, it wouldn't matter. Even if Roddy changed his mind and came back, there would always be the ghost of Mary between them, because Mary brings something out in him that she didn't, that she never will. If she hasn't brought out this passion, she won't.
Yes, but Eleanor blames Mary.
Eleanor blames Mary, but it's not Mary's fault. But she does. She is very angry with Mary. After Laura dies and she's making the bequests, she writes out a check for £7,000 to Mary because Mrs. Wellman, my aunt, would have wanted this. And she is just angry, but she is a lady, and she is going to do what is the right thing to do. She's already made bequests to all of the servants, although because she inherited the whole boodle, she didn't have to do that, but she does.
There's a lovely little bit with Nurse O'Brien complaining that Eleanor didn't invite everybody to the house after the funeral to serve tea.
Yes, and she was supposed to have had the reception at the house, and she didn't. But again, you can look at Eleanor. It's been one blow after another. She loved Laura, and Laura's her aunt, and she loved her. And suddenly she's watched her die, and then to discover that the fiancé, the man she loves more than anyone else in the world, has suddenly thrown her over for the gardener's daughter. And she's really not coping well. She's doing her best, but she's not coping well. And she has to start clearing out the mansion right away and figuring out what she's going to do next.
And I think Mary is clearing out the house,
the lodge. Mary was living at the lodge. Both her parents were dead in the TV show. So Mary now has to find a place to live. So she has to clear out the lodge. And Eleanor doesn't want anyone there in the house while she goes through her aunt's personal things. She just wants to be left alone so she can process.
Which actually is a parallel to Christie's own life, because after her mother died, and her father had already died years before, she had to clear out Ashfield, the house that she grew up in, and she spent several weeks there with the help of a maid, and this was a traumatic time of her life because it was also the time that Archie was cheating on her as well.
Yes, when she discovered that her dear, adored husband, she would have done anything for Archie, had decided, oh, well, I like my secretary better.
So there's that parallel as well. So Eleanor decides to call Mary over to the house. And which one was it? Was it Nurse Hopkins?
And Nurse Hopkins to help her with a little bit of the clean out. And they have a very light lunch of fish paste sandwiches, which is one of those quintessential British things that is utterly disgusting to the rest of the civilized and uncivilized world.
Right, she goes
you would puree tuna and make it into a gluey paste. In this case, salmon and crab and shrimp. Fish paste sandwiches show up occasionally other places. $4.50 from Paddington. Fish paste sandwiches show up because, of course, you have bones in the fish paste, and you think, why are you eating this?
Right, and Eleanor mentions to the storekeeper about the possibility of ptomaine poisoning as well, which actually shows up in Monty Python's Meaning of Life, where Death pays a visit to this little dinner party, and he actually points out that they all died because of the salmon mousse. And
I guess mousse is a very classy way of eating fish paste, because again, you've cooked the fish and then run it through then you've pureed it in the blender and then piped it into nice little dishes instead of smearing it on white bread with the crust removed.
And later Poirot has some very bitter words to say about
fish paste sandwiches, which I think were probably perfectly justified, and I'm okay with eating fish. I'm okay with eating fish. It isn't just for the cat. But the point about the fish paste sandwiches, besides her talking suspiciously because she is so distraught, she's talking suspiciously to the shopkeeper, is the sandwiches look identical. And later on during the autopsy, after Mary dies of morphine poisoning, I guess once the morphine's in the stomach, they don't know if you got the morphine from the tea or if you got the morphine from the fish paste sandwiches.
Yeah, but because Eleanor has been acting very suspicious all along, and it's really a credit to the actress because she gives line readings that are really kind of off. It's almost like she's a mild form of autism in a way. She doesn't know how to quite react to everybody, and that makes her immediately suspicious. And of course, threatening to kill Mary probably had something to do with this.
Yeah, that had something to do with it too. And of course, as both nurses say, everyone in the village, this takes place over a period of time. The time does pass, even though they don't do a good job of showing it. And of course, the weather remains eternally June, no matter how much time is passing. And I always always notice that, folks.
In the Poirot series,
it's always June. It is always June, no matter what. And it's always a sunny June, too. Always a sunny day in June. Eleanor is really traumatized, and she is really having a difficult time coping. And so she doesn't react as easily or as smoothly as you would expect, blurting things out, like the fish paste being poisonous. But in the grocer is well, I have never had a complaint. These are excellent. This is an excellent brand, because he wouldn't stock anything else. And Mary dies. Yep. And Nurse Hopkins is Johnny on the spot. And in fact, if you are watching carefully, you will see Eleanor follow eventually Nurse Hopkins into the kitchen where she's doing the washing up, and the nurse is wiping her mouth. She is looking pale. She is sweating, and she has a bloody mark on her arm, and that's where she claims it was the roses, the rose thorns. And
this is at the cottage that she was helping to clean out, because there was this arbor with beautiful roses on it.
Yes, and if you look at Nurse Hopkins carefully, you can see all the signs that you want to are right there, that she injected an emetic into herself to make herself throw up the poison, because she had poisoned the tea. And she and Mary, and she was taking a risk, but she's a trained nurse and she knew what she was doing. Mary died, and she threw it all up immediately, violently. And she had enough time to get to the sink, throw it all up, and clean up a little bit, but she had to inject the emetic to make herself throw up right away. And if she was shaking, that's why you get the blood smear on her arm, because she was probably shaking by that point, and she couldn't get the needle in clean, and so you get the blood mark.
Right, and it's said several times, Eleanor doesn't drink tea.
Yes, you were told several times, Eleanor does not drink tea.
Which should make her immediately suspicious in England. An English woman not drinking tea?
That's right. She does not drink tea. But I imagine that there are people who don't drink tea, just like there are lots of people who eat fish paste. For no discernible reason. Tuna in a blender.
So this is all set up for the trial, because Eleanor is arrested and Poirot is having under pressure to come up with a solution before she's hanged.
That's right, because they don't waste any time, particularly in the 1930s. And you can actually pinpoint the exact date, because Laura Wellman dies on the same day as George Gershwin, according to a newspaper that Poirot sees.
Which apparently was an error on their part. They put it on the wrong date, but it was. Still, it's
close enough. It was a sunny day in June. You can just assume it was a sunny day in June, because it's always a sunny day in June. But she doesn't really fight it. And the reason why she doesn't is, again, because Eleanor has extremely dainty, delicate sensibilities, very refined sensibilities.
Right.
She is a very passionate person. She keeps it tightly under control, but she feels things very strongly. And she wanted Mary Gerard to die. And then Mary did, and she feels intense guilt, as though her feelings made Mary die. She feels guilty, enormously guilty, not so guilty that she is able to plead not guilty at the trial, but she can't bring herself to fight it because she wanted Mary to die.
And she has no idea who else could have done it.
And yeah, she has no idea who else would have poisoned Mary. It was her and Nurse Hopkins, and Nurse Hopkins had no reason whatsoever on this earth to poison Mary Gerard. Why would she?
And there was a man outside, apparently, that the nurse said she saw while she was washing up the dishes. So there was always the possibility of a man, running in and poisoning the sandwiches. Slight
they were
chance
poisonous
of that.
So a ridiculous plot device, but a perfectly sensible one where you think, well, I know I didn't do it, and Nurse Hopkins couldn't have done it, so maybe some stranger came in and saw the fish paste and poisoned them. But again, that doesn't make any sense, and of course it doesn't pan out.
Well, it was identified that it might have been Roddy Winter was the man,
or it could have been Peter Lord.
Peter Lord as well.
Peter Lord is an interesting character because he has the passion for Eleanor that Eleanor has for Roddy. And one of the things they did not put in the film, which I thought was really a mistake, after the climax, when Peter Lord is mourning the fact that Eleanor will go back to Roddy, and Poirot tells him that, no, she won't. She won't. But she could go with you. But she loves Roddy. Oh, that's true. But with you, she will be happy. She would never be happy with Roddy, but with Dr. Lord, she could be happy and give all of that passion and intelligence and refinement to the doctor.
And it finally comes to Eleanor that she recalls a childhood memory about the roses, right?
About the roses, yes, and how she and Roddy had argued over which was the more beautiful rose. You have the white rose of York and the red, red rose of Lancaster. And Eleanor, she's telling Poirot this, that she realizes at that point, and this is just before they discover Mary's body, she realizes at that point that Roddy will never love her. He can't love her because he's as bloodless as a white rose, where she loves the deep red roses that smell like summer. Roddy doesn't. Roddy wants something more ethereal, I guess, less earthy, less real. But they want different things. They want something that is so diametrically opposed that even though it looks like they are perfectly matched, they will never be really happy. And Poirot kind of hints around to this a little bit when he's talking with Roddy, because you can tell that Poirot disapproves of how Roddy treated both women, that if Roddy is able to fall passionately and madly in love with Mary Gerard at first sight, if he was to regain his senses and marry Eleanor, how long would it be before he cheated on her?
Will they even make it to the honeymoon?
Would they even make it to the honeymoon? And none of that is brought out, and this is probably all idle speculation on my part, but you do get that impression that he doesn't feel for her. Roddy never felt for Eleanor the way Eleanor felt for him.
And you
never.
can see that.
And you could
see
it.
that, how he kisses her, how he talks to her, how he looks at her, even though the opening scene shows her in her negligee, and he's already fully dressed. He's ready to get out of there. That tells you all. That says it all.
He's
right
ready
there.
to walk out.
He's ready to walk out.
He's got a hot brunette in bed, and he's ready to walk out.
Absolutely. Well, and there's another clue associated with the roses and the thorns, because
yes, the rose on the trellis that Nurse Hopkins claims that she punctured herself on was a Zephrine rose, and Poirot realizes that Nurse Hopkins lied. Why did she lie? This is a petty, tiny, insignificant lie.
Because those types of roses
do not have thorns.
Now, one of the changes that they made in the story, of course, is that as Poirot is racing to save Eleanor from the hangman's noose, he sets up this wonderful trap for Nurse Hopkins.
Oh, yes, he does. And I don't believe
we didn't know who was actually being trapped, because he's roaming. He does the Poirot, but he does it from separate rooms.
Yes, he does the Poirot, but he does it essentially in 4 separate rooms, because he confronts Peter Lord and he confronts Roddy Winter kind of in the same room. Yep. And then he confronts Nurse O'Brien about her lie. And then he goes and confronts Nurse Hopkins. And instead of putting everybody in the same room, and of course he can't have Eleanor in the room because she's up there at Wandsworth waiting to be hung. And apparently he had set it up with the local inspectors to listen in to the conversation with Nurse Hopkins, where she reveals all, and Poirot fakes being poisoned.
He sets a trap in which he tells what he knows, and she sets out the cups of tea, and just off the camera, and I knew this was happening, actually. This is what happens when you watch 150 shows. You start getting an idea of what's to come. That Poirot has the rose, and he drops it in the cup, but he drops it in the cup with the tea and drinks the water that the rose was in, after making sure he covers it up with cream so that she wouldn't realize he's drinking plain water.
That's right. And then he pours that tea into the sugar bowl. I'm not sure why exactly he did, because then he's got sugar dissolved in with the poison. But I guess when they do the analysis, the sugar isn't going to be a problem.
It shows her that it's actually the tea. It shows her that it was the tea that he poured in there, I guess.
But that also means it's less likely to spill. You're less likely to spill the contents of the cup because you've got the sugar absorbing. That much sugar, it's not going to dissolve. It's going to be more like sludge.
And so it's a happy ending all the way around, although I think even with British justice, if they weren't going to acquit her in like 3 hours, it
takes a little longer than that.
But this is fiction, and it works.
And she goes off with Peter Lord, and Roddy's left with no one.
Yep.
Which is as it should be.
He deserves it.
He deserved it. He knew Eleanor didn't do it. He tells Poirot Eleanor couldn't have done that, but he can't come up with anything, and he doesn't do anything to help Poirot save Eleanor.
Yeah.
But Peter Lord does.
Yeah.
Peter Lord wants to save Eleanor. And you could say that Roddy is distraught over Laura's death because she's his aunt and she just died. And he got nothing because Eleanor got all of the money because she died without a will. And he discovered the true love of his life, and then she died within 24 hours. So he's kind of upset. But at the same time, he's not doing anything to help Eleanor, the woman he has known since they were children, and whom he was engaged to, as though once he met Mary, she turned into yesterday's breakfast, and so, who cares?
Absolutely. So he got what he deserved.
That's right. And if Eleanor has any sense at all, she'll make him a small bequest, maybe 20,000 pounds, 10% of the estate, and that's all he gets.
Well, they set him up also early on as well, because when he's talking to Poirot, he's talking about politics in Germany and how, the Nazis are doing a lot of good things over there. So automatically you go,
But it would have been a perfectly rational thing for him to say at the time.
There were a lot of people in the British upper class. Heck, there were actual collaborators too.
Oh yes. Why, look, there's Oswald Mosley, the and
one of the Mitford sisters as well.
He married one of the Mitford sisters. And of course, Edward the Abdicator, who became the Duke of Windsor. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor were tremendous Nazi sympathizers.
Yep.
I think Noel Coward famously said that they should put a statue to Mrs. Simpson in every village in the land to say thank you for saving us from that idiot.
Well, that was also why during the war he was sent off to rule Jamaica, because that was as far away. Bermuda?
Bermuda.
Okay, Bermuda, because that was as far away from the homeland as possible.
Yeah, they needed to get him completely away, and so that's where he went.
Yeah. We come near to the end, so obviously you liked.
Wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful novel. I think really one of her best for the psychology, for the glimpse into Eleanor's thinking. It's very, very emotional. Don't ever make the mistake of thinking that Agatha Christie writes cozies, because she doesn't. Mm. But it's a wonderful novel, and they made a wonderful film out of it.
Unlike what you would see in cozies, this is kind of a reverse of the trope in cozies that Mrs. Wellman and Mary, they didn't deserve to die.
Neither of them deserved what happened to them.
They were exceptionally nice people. That's also the reason why Eleanor was being suspected of it, because who would want to kill them?
Who would want to kill the gardener's daughter? Mm-hmm. Other than she took my man.
And yes, this was a great episode. It was 2 in a row, probably one of the 2 best. Although I looked through our reviews, and there are some other good ones as well.
There's some really wonderful ones.
So these go into the top 10, no doubt.
Absolutely. These were wonderful, and you don't want to miss Sad Cypress.
Right. And I don't have much about the cast, much to say about the cast. However, I will point out Paul McGann, because he was one of the doctors.
Who?
Paul McGann, who played Peter Lord. He was one of the doctors on Doctor Who. But it's the one, I think it was made for American television. And so it was only like one movie, and that was it. Although he was brought in, I think, for one of the Day of the Doctors as well. He was brought back. So
Really? Oh. Okay.
Yes,
whatever you say, dear.
Absolutely.
Whatever you say, dear. I'm not going to argue with you about your knowledge of Hollywood. I'm not going to argue.
Well, anyway, this is we come to the end, and what is on for next time? Do you know?
Darned if I can remember. I think you're going to have to look at the chart. It is. I can't remember. I'm not going to speculate, because I can't remember the least little bit. It might be the Hollow. Or it might be...
It's the next Poirot in the series, so that would be the Hollow, yes.
So it is the Hollow.
It is the Hollow.
That should be interesting, because that was an amazing novel. That was a truly amazing novel. And once again, Poirot comes in only halfway through, and he's very peripheral for most of it. And I think Agatha Christie said that she ruined the book by putting Poirot in, but the publisher insisted. But it worked for me. All I can say is it worked for me. He was there, and it worked for me, and I thought it was a great book, and we'll see. We'll see what they do. Right.
Well, and we'll see you again next week on Agatha Christie, She Watched.
Thanks so much.
Agatha Christie, She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.